So welcome to the Market Mentors podcast, Vakis.
Thank you, Matt.
No worries. So product marketing feels like it's gathering momentum right now. So I'm excited to get into this one. But before we do that, I'd love to know what your relationship is with product marketing.
Well, my relationship is I've been a product marketer for, I think, almost the majority of my career now. I came into it not knowing it was called product marketing. My where I started product marketing was at Google, and we have a bunch of different organizations doing different things, and we also have product marketing. That's actually called product marketing, but we also have other organizations that effectively do product marketing, but they're not necessarily called product marketers, and that's where I came in. And some of the stuff that we did in that department was kind of scope out the products that were built to understand the pains and gains of our customers and figure out how we could build better products. And of course, we weren't building it. We were just providing information back to the product managers. But a lot of the stuff that we were doing was understanding the competitive landscape, understanding the market, figuring out the TAM, of a particular market, and also if we could increase the market. So a lot of that stuff was not necessarily like called marketing. It was more a supporting function for product. And a lot of the stuff that we would do would also be, once we understood all this, we had a product either in alpha. I worked on a lot of the early stage products. So Gmail ads, for example, was one of the products that I helped launch. And back then we didn't actually have anything in the market. So before we launched it, we needed to run alpha programs, beta programs to figure out if this was even, would we have product market fit? And as part of that journey, of course, you develop sales enablement content, which also came out of our department, but still not called product marketing. So that's really where I started. And then at some point I had an epiphany internally at Google. I loved it there. It's a great organization, super fun. I just ended up in an unfortunate situation where I got a manager where all of a sudden it wasn't about the job anymore. It was more about like whose name gets on what piece of content, which is never nice. But it's kind of like you go with the flow. But for me, it was a moment where I really started to ask myself a bunch of questions, not about like my next role, because I'd done that. And I also saw that it didn't really lead me to a place where I saw a path for myself. Because next role, intuitively, it's within Google, right? You're within this amazing organization. You want to stay. But I then started asking myself, like, who do I want to become? So kind of reframing, repositioning, if you will. And that led me to a completely different path. So all of a sudden I figured out that the things that I want to achieve and the things that are important that goes along with becoming this person I saw for myself was not really to be found at Google. So I ventured outside, and that's actually where I realized that, hey, what I do is product marketing, and that's really what I like live for and breathe for. I think it's super interesting, an interesting space. So I started to learn more, connect with more people, and figured out that, hey, like product marketing is not only messaging and positioning. It is very much also that, but it's not just that. It's much broader than that.
Yeah, and you touched on a few of the sort of tactics there, sort of including things like sales enablement and stuff like that. But and certainly when we talk to companies and product marketers, you do hear very different or slightly different versions of it. But what is product marketing to you specifically then?
For me, it should be such an easy question to answer. I'm still working with the positioning. and messaging for product marketing. But really, what I see it as is it's the function that helps you carve out a space for you to compete. What does that mean? Well, it means that you have a product, and many other people like you probably have a similar product. And that's what we're seeing. There's a lot of very similar products out there. But the product marketer can really help you get to the essence of what type of pains and gains your product solves. And more specifically, it can help you identify the job that your customers are hiring you to do. And if we look at a bunch of different industries, we see that, okay, one type of software is really good at solving one job, but another type of software that is essentially the same within the same category solves that job complete or solves a completely different job. So a company that you can take as an example is Gong.io. They're not calling themselves a CRM, and they're not calling themselves recording software. Those are two capabilities that they have within in their realm, but that's not how they position their product. Because if they would position themselves as a CRM, they're being compared to HubSpot, Salesforce, the usual suspects, right? And that's an incredibly difficult space to compete in. So what a product marketer can come in and help them do is figure out, okay, what is the job that we're solving for the customer? Really understand the pains and gains related to that job, and then reposition themselves as the center of that perfect solution, or as the perfect solution for that problem. And they've done that really well. Like you see the company growing is exceptionally fast. People get it. They don't think immediately CRM, but like their problem is something different. They want to understand the reality of their pipeline and get away from like those opinion-based decisions that are made day to day, because often that brings us in the wrong direction. They understand it and they communicate it, and that's what product marketing does. And then all of a sudden, you can look at the typical matrices that you have for your competitive landscape, and you can see where you stand out. And why is that important? Well, it's important because if you have your usual matrix of, hey, this is CRMs, then you're competing against Salesforce, HubSpot, or any other upcoming CRM. But really, that's not your play. That's not your game. Your game is playing within this very niche market for that very niche job. And when you look at it that way, you become much more focused, because then you don't worry about the upcoming competitors. You simply look at them and say, hey, do they complete the job that we are hired to do better than us? If not, okay, don't worry about them. We can look at them when they start to do that. But for now, let's focus in on our playing field. So it's really just like carving out space is how I like to think about it.
Yeah, and if anybody hasn't checked out Gong's marketing, I would highly recommend it, because their marketing is top notch. And that example reminds me of kind of Drift, really. When Drift came to market with Intercom already in the category, well, already in a category, they could have easily gone into that category, but actually instead of doing that, they kind of created a whole new category around. I think it was conversational marketing, wasn't it? So super interesting. So you've touched on it a little bit there. I mean, why do you think it's just so particularly important then, product marketing, in sort of today's age then, for sort of B2B tech businesses?
For me, if you look at the SaaS landscape, the number of startups is growing rapidly. We like a couple of years back, I think 10 years back, like there was only a few, and now there's like absolute thousands. And every day, probably hundreds or tens more start, which is just it's incredibly difficult to as a buyer to look at like the tools that we have today and define like, okay, what's the right ones for me. We're hearing more about, okay, what's the perfect tech stack? That's very much up in time. How do you connect everything? So like if you don't have someone to really understand what job you're hired to do as a company or as a piece of software, if that is it, then it's going to be really difficult for you to compete because you're going to be in a position where you think you're competing against everything. And that's really dangerous because then you also start to provide information to your product team that you should develop XYZ feature. So all of a sudden, instead of just being a form, you start to become like a workspace. So like you start building spreadsheets because it's important to have like a place where you can manipulate data. But really, what is end of the day the most important thing to understand is what's the job to be done for the customer. Because if you understand that well, then you don't have to necessarily build for the complete solution. You just need to figure out, okay, who will my strategic partners be? How can I partner with other pieces of software so that we can help each other grow hand in hand? And that'll enable us to just exclusively focus on what we're really good at and take everything else and move it over to a partner that can do that much better than us. Because end of the day, what you're delivering to the market, the promise that you deliver, you need to also like deliver that in the end and make sure that like people actually get what they're looking for. Because if you can only complete their job to a certain extent, there's going to be another competitor that comes up and takes it out from
Uh,
underneath your feet.
and they talk certainly within sort of product-led businesses, getting to that aha moment as quick as you can because the attention is so short for people. They will move on to something else if they don't get that aha moment quickly enough. That's the kind of top end then, the sort of big picture stuff. From a practical point of view then, let's say, for instance, we've got a tech business who's listening to this right now. When should they hire their first product marketer?
It's really hard to answer. My recommendation will always be if you have your first marketer that you want to hire a product marketer. In general, they will have the background to pull off pretty much any other discipline. No, they will not be the perfect demand gen person because in many cases, what you need from a demand gen person is going to be slightly different. But if you have a demand gen person doing product marketing, that's just not going to be as great. So if you hire a product marketer, you'll have typically a more well-rounded marketer because they've been through pretty much every stage in order to get to product marketing. It's typically not where you directly start out. And a product marketer will in general also think through growth in a different way. They'll think through all of the different facets of marketing in a much different way. Typically, if you hire a product marketer, they're also pretty good writers. So that comes up useful for when you need to think like create content and all the other activities. So you get a more well-rounded marketer. They are really hard to get a hold of. They're also getting increasingly more expensive. I think what I'm starting to see now is that they're almost becoming like engineers because they're a scarce resource. And there's not a lot of organizations out there that are helping to ramp up the skill because it is there are very few. We're starting to see more and more platforms like Sharebird where you can go and learn about product marketing. You can see how other marketing leaders think through very complex issues. And you can even ask questions directly and get quick feedback. Then you also have the product
Product
marketing
marketing alliance. Yeah.
they're doing just excellent work. Richard King has done a really good job at getting that organization set up. But there's also a lot of resources. So if you are looking for more of an education, that's the right, or certification, if you will, that's the right way to go. But it's it's a scarce resource, really hard to get a hold of. But if you can, make it your first marketing hire.
Yeah.
If not, make it your first hire when you start to think about how to position your company. So if you're in a space that's highly competitive, that is not completely new to the market, then hire a product marketer to figure out how to position your company in that space.
And how early is too early? I mean, would you say even pre-revenue then?
You could, but like have some sort of revenue.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think like if you're pre-revenue,
You'd want to have
hire
some
a good,
funding.
but hire a good PM that can help you scope out what you're actually doing. Because if you don't know what your product is yet, it's really hard to position it, and you're going to have to do it multiple times. So really hire a good PM who knows how to do product market fit service. Figure out what problem or job your customers are hiring you to do, and what their problems is with their current solution today. I think you can do that with a really good PM. So like pre-revenue, I'd probably wait.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. So here's a scenario then. You've been hired as a company's first product marketer. What are the 2 or 3 things that you'd want to kick off or complete in your first 90 days then?
First, understand the customer. Learn who the customer is. What is the job that they're trying to do with your product, and why do they come to you? What pain points do they encounter in order to like seek you out? And then also understand why they sought you out, and what they were looking for, and whether or not our product is actually fulfilling that. So that's the first thing that I would probably do. If I cannot talk to customers, I talk to the sales team, if there is a sales team, or start to talk to the founders, everyone who can give you sort of piecemeal information that you can package together to better understand. Okay, what is the job to be done here? What's the problem I'm trying to tackle? The next things would be to, if we have a customer base, do a product market fit survey. I've found it to be the absolute most impactful way to get information really fast. It'll also help you understand which customers see your product as valuable more than others, and also what exactly they see as value in your product.
And that would be a classic. If our product didn't exist, how would it make you feel?
Exactly. Very, very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, not disappointed at all. And that just helps you to group your different customers. And then you can see, okay, here's perhaps a segment we don't want to focus on. So for example, when I was at Typeform, a form can do a million things, right? So like, are we doing wedding invitations or lead gen? Where is kind of a problem that occurs that's important enough to hire a solution like Typeform. And it helps us kind of gauge which customer groups are more valuable than others, and also exactly how that customer group is using and finding value in our product.
Fine. And that would be the third bit then. It's the customer, it's the product market fit, and then it's translating that data into, okay, almost like a bit of go-to-market. Who is our ideal customer profile? That kind of stuff, really. It's that sort of strategic bit at the front. What about when you're moving past those 90 days? Once that sort of stuff's in place, then you've got a good idea of that. What would you be looking to expand into?
So I'd hopefully do that within the first 60 days. But the next things I'd move into, but I'd also do in parallel, because a lot of these things, it doesn't take a lot of time. So some of the things that you want to figure out as well in parallel is, how's the organization set up? Do you have a sales team? What kind of resources do they have? If they do have a sales team, what's the narrative? Is there a narrative in place, or is that something that we need to build? And that's some of the things I'm working on at Shyyple today, is like really understanding in depth how we stand out and how we can build a narrative in the market that makes sense to to our buyers, and also who are our buyers. So figure out, like, is there a sales team in place? What kind of resources do we have? Are there any projects that you can get involved into, like low hanging fruits that you can kind of help move forward so that you add value to the company, which is the most important part. So one of the things that like is often an easy win if you're in a sales led organization is figuring out how can you move more product led. So how can you help customers move faster to value? I think most organizations, it takes ages to get to value. You have to go through all of the different screening sessions where customers are or companies are vetting you as a potential customer. Will you be high value or are you garbage? And I think moving to a more product-led model, or at least a hybrid, will help the organization move a lot faster and help the customers get to value faster, even if that is letting go of certain customers. So filtering out a lot of the customers who aren't going to be valuable to you, or even more importantly, customers who are not going to see value in your platform. Because that's really the last thing that you want to attract is customers who come in because they think that they can complete a job, but you can't actually help them with that because that leads to dissatisfaction across the board. And that's never nice.
Well, I think Canva do it well. So, their time to get to using the product is very good. And, you can be Googling for a design template. You click on the URL and you're actually in the product. It's pretty incredible, but very valuable as well, isn't it? So slightly changing tack then. I mean, if you were hiring for a product marketer into your team then, what sort of skills and attributes would you look for?
So I tend to look for good writers, people who, and good writers, I mean, people who can write in a concise manner. So I think we see a lot of people who are like reasonable writers, but they tend to have very long form text. So I think the person I would look for is someone who knows how to cut out all of the excess information that's not necessarily that valuable, and like basically stick to the bare bones. Someone who can convey things very clearly in a short way, I think, is also typically the ones that get it better than others. I look for people who use analogies. That's typically one of the most challenging parts is when you're trying to get someone to understand something. If you can't create a bridge to something that they do understand today, it's really difficult to get them to understand what the product is that you're trying to sell. So someone who uses analogies effectively often, that is a big plus in my book. And then people with grit. I love working with people who like can stand up for what they believe in and provide information. So not necessarily get angry if there's a no, but figure out, okay, like what are the pieces that are missing? Why am I getting that no? And then presenting that information in a like well delivered package. So use customer statements as arguments, use customer data as arguments, but really like not take no for an answer. Like go back to the drawing board and say, okay, here are some of the things that I think is missing from the conversation, and by adding those pieces, we can have a better conversation, one that actually moves forward. And also knowing a balance of when to say no and when to just disagree and commit. I think that's always something that I'm looking for. And then growth mindset. Like I think I try to bring that to the table. Always like want to learn more. I tend to listen more than I speak. Uh, Others would probably say no. It depends on the meeting, of course. But I really try to like understand what is being brought in front of me instead of just like immediately saying no, or immediately saying, "Oh, we've tried that." Like I hate that expression. Like we've tried that, it didn't work. Like it's a cop out in my opinion. What I would love is like, oh, that's super interesting. In the past, we tried these things. This was the approach. How could we contribute so that we can perhaps run another experiment? And then if we have all the data available, then we can better make a decision of, okay, they've actually already done this. It didn't work out well. They thought really well about the problem and the solution. Let's move on. So that I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I look at the world.
It does. I mean, I agree with the storytelling angle in particular. And I know Product Marketing Alliance do a course around narrative design, which is really interesting, especially as you're talking about new solutions in new categories. You've got to join up the problem with existing solutions and help people understand it. So I think it's really important. What do you think is the most difficult challenge? To me, there's sort of two elements of being a product marketer. There's almost like the technical skills. You can go and learn that to a certain degree, building OKRs and pricing strategies and all this kind of stuff. But then there's the softer skills angle, isn't there? There's because you're product on one side, you've got the board or the leadership team at the top, then you've got the sales and marketing to the other side. You are really in the middle there as a product marketer, I see. So to my mind, some of the softer skills are perhaps the harder things to learn, and what perhaps sets a really good product marketer from a good product marketer.
Listening skills, relationship. I think that, like, if you can listen and connect, that's the most important part. That's also where, like, in really complex organizations like Google, you really need to understand, like, okay, what does the stakeholder landscape look like? Because you have many. I worked on one project where we had more than 50 stakeholders across, it was like 12 or 15 different departments. It's a mess. But if you are able to listen and understand the challenges that each department and incentives that each department has, you're in the best possible solution to connect or position to connect all of these parties. And that's really what your job is like, of course, present all the data, but all the data is also understanding incentive systems across the different stakeholders. So if you can effectively listen to what people are saying, repeat it back to them, and get a yes, that's exactly right, you're also in a better position to connect and say, hey, like, John, this is what Alice is saying, and that actually connects pretty well with what you were trying to do over here. Does that make sense? So that you can constantly create connections across the board with CS, sales, support, engineering, PM, whatever you organizations you deal with in a day-to-day. And that brings everyone closer to each other. And I think you rightfully pointed out, Product Marketing Alliance are doing a course on narrative design. I'd recommend definitely attending that. First, I think Marcus is one of the ones that are running that. And he's doing a great job at, like, telling the importance of narrative. And it does become important, because if you can create a narrative where you connect all of the different stakeholders and present it in a package where all of them can get excited about it, that's where you see movement. Otherwise, you just get an acknowledging nod, and then they go over and do something completely different, which is also important. Like, you need to be aware of when those situations happen, so that you can bring them closer, and ask questions, figure out, like, okay, why is this happening? Is there incentive systems that are not aligned? How can we move forward so that you can also, if it's the case of misaligned incentives, bring in the VPs, C-suite, whatever you need to make sure that, like, okay, we open up that conversation. here you have a department that's going in this direction, and that's because of this. Here you have a department going in the other direction. And what we really should be doing is turning towards each other and moving in the same direction.
When you start to talk about it, it's no surprise that finding good product marketers is hard, isn't it? So on the flip side then, imagine, we're presenting you with a product marketing role. What do you want to know about it? What's a green light? What's a red flag? What sort of interests you as a product marketer? How should companies be positioning product marketing jobs to attract good product marketers?
For me, it depends. Can I learn something? Is it a challenge? That's always the two first things I look for. And that's the most important thing. Everything else comes second. The things that are important to me in terms of like having the PMM is it the first in the company? If it is the first in the company, I want to understand who had the idea of bringing in a PMM. Because if it doesn't come from the CEO, I will probably say no. If the CEO doesn't understand it, it's a no. Simply because if you look at demand gen, it's really easy to understand the value. You spend marketing dollars, you acquire customers, they bring in revenue. That is a very, very easy calculation to make. If you're looking at a PMM, you don't necessarily have that. Because if you have a demand gen person in place and the PMM opens up or makes a market more efficient because of positioning or XYZ, demand gen person can always say, oh, well, we did some new, opened up some new channels, some new experiments, and that worked out really well. And yeah, sure, that's also accurate, but it doesn't run on its own. And we've seen examples where we've completely obliterated the past numbers, and then it's just a demand gen person doing their job really well. It's super fun how the world works. So have the CEO be the main driver of getting this resource in. And if the CEO isn't, the CMO definitely has to understand what is the purpose and set the clear goal, very clear goals for what you need to achieve that the CEO aligns with. If that's not in place, massive red flag. The other thing I look at is the job that the potential company that I'll join is performing for the customer. Is it a real job, or is it just we're trying to do millions of jobs? That's important for me to understand, and then understand if we can limit it to the important job. Because if there's no focus in the organization, you're going to end up not growing as fast as you would if you have clear focus. If the organization is willing to go more niche with their product because they understand they can find more value by doing that, then that's a green flag for me. If they say, worry about a ton of different competitors, that's a massive red flag for me, because it means there's no focus. They don't know what they're developing for. And one of the places where I go to figure out if this is a red flag or a green flag is I tend to get a meeting with the leading product person, whether that's a CPO or head of product management, whoever runs the product org. That's where I really look for those clues, because they can give me an indication of how they work, how they think about their roadmap. Because I've been in organizations where the roadmap was basically just feature requests.
Yeah. Or our competitors just launched X. We need to do it.
Yeah, it's hard. So I'm looking for what's a guiding stick. One company that I really look to for a lot of inspiration is Superhuman. They're really clear cut about what they're building for and who they're building for, and they have a really strong model for how they when they have more engineering resources available, and they are fixing all of the things that is their primary focus. They have a really clear-cut model for what their next step is. How do we look at the next feature in line or the next thing that we want to build for? I think that's super admirable, the way that they go about that.
Is that Jack Dorsey?
It is Rahul Vora.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We touched on a little bit in terms of where to learn as a sort of final question. Product Marketing Alliance, Sharebird, any other areas that you sort of point people to if they're looking to either increase their product marketing knowledge or move into it perhaps?
I think if you know anyone in your network that you can talk to, hear their story. Everyone has a unique story of how they got into product marketing. I think like Sharebird is my favorite destination for information, because there's a lot of peers that I don't necessarily have a direct connection to, and they're some of the best in the business. Really, really smart people that everyone could learn from, and many of the smartest people already go there to like learn more. So that's a great resource. Product Marketing Alliance. If you have an internal L&D budget at your company, buy their plan. They have a ton of resources, a lot of basically templates that you can download if you need to do something. And there's also a lot of courses where you can get PMM certified. I think like that way, at least you get the basics in place and you learn from really smart people. So I think for me, I'd probably stick to those two resources for now, unless you know any PMMs in your network. Then like talk to them, reach out to other PMMs. I've found that especially PMA, or Product Marketing Alliance, they have a Slack channel where you can meet other PMMs. So if you're a new PMM or one that's been in the business for many years, they're really helpful in connecting you with mentors or other product marketers that can kind of show you the way. And I think that's a great way to learn. My previous team, I signed them all up for PMA. It's really like a great investment also for other marketing leaders. If you're looking for a gift for your team, give them that. It's like gold. It's great knowledge. It'll help everyone develop.
Yeah, I've done the certificate myself. It is really good. We're not on commission either, are we? I'm just checking.
I promise. I have no interest in it. They're just both Alex Lopez, who runs Sharebird, and Richard King are really good people. And they've done a lot of really good work. So I'm happy to support.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today, Vakis. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and your experience.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.